All right. Okay. All right, guys. So we're gonna go ahead and start the lecture today. And housekeeping notes. If you have not turned in your midterm, the deadline is on the 1st. So after that, unless you're having a problem turning this in, you have to turn them in, or you're not going to get a grade for it. Again, I've said it many times in every lecture, you can submit your slides to me with some sort of recorded voiceover or video, and that will do it for your grade. Another thing is that, what do I say? Oh, okay. Then your reflection papers are due, and I had also delayed the documentary review. That is also a grade you have to turn in on the 1st. So I pushed basically everything that was done 2, 3, 4 weeks ago to for the 1st, and after that the rules follow of late submissions getting point taken off. Of course, as always, if there's a reason you're late or you're having trouble submitting this for some reason, please let me know. We'll work it out. You have my email and everything. So I believe okay. So the last time we kind of were going through some of the dominant ideologies of nationalism, what sorts of leftist beliefs there were generally, and then I talked to you about a little bit on the religious establishment, but mainly the character of Sayyid Ruhollah Musavi Khomeini, which we know as the name Khomeini. And note that this Khomeini is very different of the current supreme leader, who's Khamenei. They're not the same people. And we'll get to him later on. So after we talked about Khomeini, we did discuss a bit about where he was from Rome, and that he was exiled in 1964, directly after the 1963 riots and uprisings. And then I briefly discussed the idea of Velayat al-Faqih, which is the rulership of the jurisconsults, as how I translated this. So you might see different versions of it every way. And yeah, so we discussed a little bit Islamic beliefs on what to do and how to be part of this movement. And how to express opposition against the Shah, but that is the general. I kind of were just going to put light on this Khomeini for our current purposes. If you want more information on this, hit me up. There are some good papers and books on it too. So now I want to kind of flush out a bit of the leftist movement here. So again, we have to once again kind of move back and put this in perspective, right? So in the 50s, there are certainly a lot of liberty in 1955, which then leads to United States invasion of Vietnam and the support of the North Vietnamese forces. Then there's the Palestinian resistance that kind of most important is PLO under Yasser Arafat. And this kind of major emergence with the establishment of the Israel as a nation into exile the Palestinian people, and then the war of 1967 when Israel wages a successful war, defensive war, arguably against some Arab states like Egypt and which kind of leads into taking more territories and having more of a military presence within these territories. There is the Algerian independence of the French in 1962. So these are kind of these movements, libertarian movements that are happening. And these movements happen against, you have to kind of separate these with the existence of the Soviet Union, which we've been discussing, and the Chinese communism, these huge kind of states that were never really colonial nations. I mean, China is under mandate of many European nations at this point, and Hong Kong continues to be so up until our lifetime. But so there's kind of third worldist movements, as we call them, as I mentioned earlier. So the ideology that the left kind of draws in Iran is mostly inspired by the first group, the Maoist and Marxist-Leninist versions of how to develop a modern nation and how to have a more just society within the Marxist socialist kind of conception of economy and life. So their general criticism, however, were kind of very vast, but within Iran, these are kind of some of the points that they take. Some of this against, as we talked about last time, with cultural imports, right? Like the concept of qabzadagi, was toxication, and the decline of Islamic traditions of everyday life. They're prominent. Their kind of prominence within everyday life, right? And as we see, not all of these are connected to the Shah's rule or foreign existence. Some of them just the new emerging petty bourgeois class and urban dwellers who are kind of striving for more of a cosmopolitan life and don't see much value in these strict adherence to traditions of what they deem to be belief systems that are more appropriate for seeing kind of the diminishing of British rule, right, and the more especially with the Shah's relationship with the United States, especially with the Republican Party under Nixon. There is this grievance against foreign on the Iran Northern territories, which a lot of people see as problematic. There's lack of political rights, as you've seen. Mohammad Reza Shah has kind of later on in his rule instruments, which are more authoritarian, right? That the Shah has a lot of power and sidesteps the parliament. And I've gone over happens on material grounds. There's this again. This is kind of from the landlord and peasant relationship, but there is this disproportionate economic distribution, right? So there are people within cities that are getting these new jobs. They're moving into second generations. They're starting to have kids now, and then there's peoples in villages and agrarian life and all that, which I've talked about, that is diminishing. But then there is this mass movement to the cities, right? And the cities, especially Tehran, are not developing as fast as one would like time. But there is this mass movement going on. The population is really exploding. Its rate of expansion is very high, and there's not enough space and not enough material access to purchase land. And at the same time, because of lack of regulation at this time, in places like Tehran, the prices of renting and buying are going up, because why not? So then there's a lot of customers, right? And the prices are going up to match the ones that can't afford it. And there's enough people that can farm those. So this actually kind of leads to, in the southern parts of Tehran, to the development of these slums, right? Where a ton of people are there. They're making slums out of basically scrap metal and whatnot. And this population is certainly going up. And the other ones are, we've talked about this, and we've kind of exhausted these topics, the idea of the arbitrary nature of monarchical power and the illegitimacy of the government, right? So people are, even though there is this talk, especially within the wide revolution, of more democratic involvement within the government, we've seen that the parties are closed down. The parliament's kind of losing its power, and as these institutions and the bureaucracies lose their kind of democratic, even if the veneer in the beginning, the public starts to lose confidence in them as a way to access their political rights or exercise their political rights, right? Because the political right, as we understand it, is not merely being free, not having government in your life, or, as the kind of some of the cliche versions of it's the ability, as people at that point understood and still do, to able to change your life and be heard within the government institutions, right? Have a relevant voice. So what are so now that I'm listing these in general form, so a lot of their even separatist group or religious establishment or tribe overlap, as we've talked about a lot. But the leftist movement really does home in on this idea of injustice within modernity and Shah's relationship to kind of sustaining these antagonisms, if you will, to use their own words, or tezad, as far as it goes. Some of the new notable groups you're already familiar with. We've talked a lot about Tudeh, but now we also have Mujahideen Khalq, which is the People's Mujahideen, and Mujahideen comes from Mujtahid, from earlier lectures. And then there's Fadayan Khalq, which are Fadayin is or Fadayin Khalq is another way of saying it. Is the Fadayin? It means to self-sacrifice. Khalq is people. So both of those groups have Khalq in their name. And just a little disclaimer: the words Fadayin appear in different groups, not only in Iran, and some of them are purely Islamic groups, so you have to delineate within these. And I'll put these lectures up, of course, after the lecture, so you can see these names. And some of the tactics of these groups were kind of guerrilla militancy, especially after 63. For example, there is this event in 71, I want to say. I have to double check this Yes, 1971. There's the guerrilla insurgency in Siarkal. We always talk about mountainous area, which we've kind of seen through Iranian history, being home to a variety of guerrilla insurrections. But the Siarkal incident was kind of a group of leftist militias were trying to go and free some of their friends from a local jail there, but it kind of turned into the plan goes awry, and then there's a shootout that's happening, and afterwards, many of the militants are killed, and then the rest are kind of arrested and executed. Of course, the event itself is nothing special, especially considering the Iranian history. Well, what is special is that the event kind of catches on publicly in the public imagination as a important resistance against the Shah by a people who have seen that their exercise of political power is useless, so they have kind of given into violent means, right? And this is kind of really interesting. The new 2 books I've been reading in the quarantine. One I finished earlier. One is the Shadowlands. And I'll put these up here if you want to look at them, which is about the militia group in the United States that took over the bird sanctuary in Oregon. And I was living there at that point, so I was kind of very interested to kind of bird eye view of the event. And the book is very long, really fleshes these events out. And the other book I'm reading is One Man's Terrorist, which is about the IRA, the Irish Republican kind of independence party, and the army, and complicated history of fighting against the British and Irish forces within Ireland, which they see as counter revolutionary. Nevertheless, I'm saying all this so kind of it's interesting to kind of revisit my notes about Iran at this time and read these books, and then see this idea, this general concept of how when a people see their political powers useless against the more powerful system. And it's interesting because within the United States has its Congress, Britain has a parliament, Iran had a parliament, right? So people have some access. But regardless of fact, when there is it catches within a segment of population that their political power is useless, and then they're also sympathetic to these kind of smaller militant resurrections, right? They use violence, right? Even though the political and the military approaches to whatever their goal is as a group are in contradiction with each other. Because if you have a democratic process, supposedly you don't need militia. And if you have militia, it means that your democratic process is useless. But within real world, these things do access. So in that sense, the event of the Siarkal of 1971 really catches in with the students and the bourgeoisie movement, and kind of spreads around. As a sense, and in Iran, they haven't started kind of translating these events, these clashes against the Shah, as a martyrdoms, but that language comes later, right? So it's important to keep in mind that a lot of these events, which later on will be cast in the kind of a crucible of Imam Hussein's talk about a lot. At this time, they're not so much, right? Later on, they'll be, in retrospect, they'll be cast in that, and I'll bring some of them up. Even, it's very important to think of people like Shariati that I talked about, for example, and Golestorchi and stuff. Some of the people who die from natural causes, some people who die in opposition against the government this time. Later on, it's not rare to see them being presented as martyrs, right? For example, Shariati that I discussed, that is kind of a subject of fascination for me, who just died in 77 from heart attack because a guy, he was jailed a lot. He had a hard political life, but he also smoked 2 packs of cigarettes. But nevertheless, when I was growing up in Iran, you see big murals of Shariati, even though like his ideas have nothing to do with the Islamic Republic. I mean, they're in contradiction. But yeah, to have his mural and kind of describe him as a shahid or a martyr, or like someone who has died in a religious cause against a bigger injustice, as it is kind of portrayed now. So this is kind of the gem of the leftist critique. Okay, so we could go in each of these little groups and pick them apart, but that kind of gives away, it'll take us away from the narrative. But these again make great reflection papers, right? If you just want to explore, for example, Mujahideen Khab, great paper, and I would love to read it. Okay, so this is it. So now we've talked about the leftist critique. We talk about the people outside of Tehran. We've talked about the religious groups. Now we kind of want to talk about a little bit about the general discontent, if you can kind of do such a thing to say, okay, so now here's the general population's response to this era, this form of government, this sort of monarchy. So again, lack of political autonomy. We've always talked about this. But then there's economic reasons, right? So one thing you gotta kind of really keep in mind is that there is this question that comes up, especially if you're talking about these classes, it comes up in many discussions, that regardless of that, there's this bafflement, right? That, okay, so regardless of what Shah is doing, right, Iran is not perfect, but then there is this undeniable betterment of life under Shah, especially for this emerging middle class, right? They might not have all the political rights that you would have in United States, but you are suddenly, you can afford a car and a house, and go to poetry nights that have like political undertonings. Like there's this kind of, and you're in a city, there are businesses popping up. People can now go study abroad, and they even love to come back. And this is kind of an interesting that happens at this time. A lot of people who study abroad do come back at this time, unlike right now where people go and study and they stay in diaspora because they don't want to live in Iran. Some of the people of this class. So, but yeah, so let's talk about, so in this kind of seemingly better world that these people have, right? Because some of them have seen, you know, from not having running water and electricity in their lifetime under Shah to kind of living in a modern nation. So why would they be upset? So there are political reasons within the general population for some of this. So some of this is shortage of goods in response to fast increasing demands by population. People have money, people buying stuff, but Iran can't, the government of Iran can't provide everyone with everything. And need is just very subjective, and it's very kind of, this is not in verbatim, but he has this concept that, you know, your house is at a perfectly fine size, unless, why can't my house be that big, right? What is wrong with me or the world that I can't have that kind of house? So this is it. People in the cities, their life is kind of generally economically and a little bit politically getting better, so their expectations go higher, right? So that's one thing, especially if you study abroad, or if you're just in the well, kind of be getting better or not. Another one is the rise of housing, and I've already talked about that. The appearance of slums is also, so there are people who have to live in these slums and have kind of a dispossessed lifestyle, but then there's also people who are like, who are all these new people coming in here, right? That either their kind of response is revolting, like, ugh, you know, these new villagers coming into the city, we're trying to have a cool, chic life, or as the, and this one is, I think, is more prominent. This idea of when you see that, oh, the life I'm living is not extended to a lot of these other people. I mean, look, the vast of the population seems to not be educated bureaucrats and college professors and business owners. There seems to be something wrong in this society, right? Poverty, the kind of experience of poverty of others is also a source of discontent, and this is very much seen. This and you know, the more people see this sort of poverty, especially in the 70s, the more it kind of reflects on, well, this thing is going on, but it is not helping, right? So you have to really think about this. Like, people's expectations change, increase, decrease, and they're volatile, right? Like, somebody can influence them to think the other way, right? So the idea is not really that, oh, was the Shah's regime was so bad that people couldn't take it and all stuff. The better question is that maybe why did people feel such thing, right? And why did they support oppositions against the Shah or join the fight against the Shah? Yeah, so here's an interesting. So the government at this time, the which is the monarchy of the Shah, does hear some of this discontent, especially, like, for example, about the prices, that prices are going up, housing is not available. And, you know, we've talked a lot about this in the outskirts of Tehran, not outskirts of Tehran, in other provinces of Iran, right? Especially where agrarian life is kind of more strong with land reform, and you saw the discontent with that. Like, you might help a lot of peasants, but you also piss off a lot of landlords. You piss off a lot of landlords. You piss off the religious class, right? So the same thing happens in the city when the government comes in. It's like, okay, so let's do price control, right? So now who's discontented? The people in the Bazari class, right? The merchants, right? Who are kind of, you know, like these new population with the disposable income that are buying more and more from them, right? Why shouldn't we be able to raise our prices and make more money off of it, right? This kind of the free market spirit is also, you know, present here within the Iranian urban life, right? So we also have to consider that it's not that Shah is not doing anything about these problems within Iran. The problem is that when he does address it, he also feels a criticism for that. You can't please everyone, right? I mean, the same thing's happening here, right? We're trying to do a stimulus package. Well, one just passed, but the first one that just passed very quickly after coronavirus was like to kind of pump the markets and the banks, right, with trillions of dollars immediately, right? Some people are like, oh yes, we need this, banks need this, we need to have finances going on, blah 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 blah, and then people are like, jump up, it's like, oh, and I can't get my like $1,000 check. I have to wait 2 months, and these guys just get a check. You know what I mean? Even though the rationality might be, and I'm just imagining that, oh, if your bank goes out of business, or a bunch of banks go out of business, then the federal government can't return all their insured money, and then you lose your savings. You get the idea? The things are connected, and the government tries to address them all. But there will always be discontent, sometimes rightly, sometimes wrongly. Same thing is happening in Iran within the urban population. But one of the most important things that we're talking about, that is worth talking about within this new educated class's discontent, is the inability, the censorship, right, with the parliament, but his kind of censorship and crackdown on opposition, his own government, members of parliament, members of his cabinets or court, and sometimes out. So this his kind of antagonism against those institutions is something that is also offending to a lot of people, right? Again, you have high expectations. You might have grown up in a world where there weren't, I mean, there were like maybe one newspaper or two newspaper, and now you have option of 20 and pamphlets and political pamphlets and any reasonable need that the Shah should come and take this away from you. Maybe you just want to and these tapes that are coming that from outside the country is part of this. Maybe you're interested in the lectures that he's recording in exile now in Najaf. Right? Maybe you want to read Jean-Paul Sartre, just to see what it is. Maybe you don't agree with it, but you want that right? And kind of Shah coming against it causes a lot of discontent. Yeah, so all of this kind of leads to a kind of a very intense scene that is kind of ready to explode, right? And it is with the scene that the seeds of like I was reading this book on 1917, the revolution or coup, based on your perspective of Bolsheviks succeeds. Like people till hours before didn't even know if this, like, are we doing this? If this is a revolution, are we winning? What are we winning? Right? Because a lot of people are involved. So ideas kind of are being kind of, I'm lost for words here, keep building up on each other, becoming this nucleus of energy, right? Then people might not know, even if they're using revolutionary language starting to 70s, that people might not know exactly what is coming, but something is coming because the general public is agitated. Yeah, so in order to now, I just want to talk about the revolution here, and I'm going to fast forward to 1978 and take you through it day by day. Of course, there's a bunch of stuff that happens in the 70s, but I'm kind of giving you a general narrative of how to understand it. But to come to the revolution, kind of the first thing happens, especially there's a lot of back and forth, public back and forth again with the Shah and a lot of these people, especially Khomeini. The Shah kind of orders this secretly, this article to be published against in Etelat news under order. Shah is very critical of Khomeini, right? And pay attention to the date. This is 1978. Khomeini has been out of country for a while, but he's still a prominent figure, especially with this new emerging Shia revolutionary group. The kind of critique of this article, what it's talking about, and this is available in English, if you want to kind of read it. This idea that Khomeini is a foreign agent, right? And some of these kind of today, some of this kind of myths about Khomeini, where people are kind of against the Islamic Republic, some of these are still prevalent, but they're all made up. That he was a foreign agent, that he was sympathetic to the communists, which he wasn't, but that he was also Indian. So this like this idea, and this only works within, you might say, so what? But within this Shah's white revolution, cultural revolution, this idea of Aryanness, of being of Iran and purity, this idea that Khomeini is actually an Indian is a way of trying to kind of hurt his image. And the truth is that he had a grandfather that came from India, but he grew up very much in the center of Iran, very close to where my, it's just a lot of insult, and some of these critiques are true, especially like, for example, uh, uh, kind of taking away all of sending back, if you will, if you want to use that language, all of Shah's efforts towards the liberation or women's suffrage, if you say, not liberation, kind of making the life of the women in Iran better and giving them more political access and prominence. Yeah, so they're all in there, but nevertheless, this article on the crowd. So this happens, but there's this tradition in Iran. It's like, let me write this, Shabe Chele. It's the 40th night, and Chele comes from Chehel, which is 40 Chehele. Mourning in Iran has kind of different stages that we have it in the United States, but that cultural process takes 40 days. There's 40 days of mourning for a person who dies. So, and you know, the Iranian, just like, just speaking in general terms, this idea of mourning and celebrating everything happens and share these cultural procedures. So the people who die within this confrontations, right? So they all going to have Shabbat Shaleh because the government shot them, they died, and mourning happened. But this interesting thing that happens that these 40th nights, right, or 40 days of mourning, all turn into and especially there is the most important at the 40th day, 40th night, right, where you say your kind of a last goodbye. So a lot of these mournings or these extended funerals, it will be turning to political rallies, right, for all these people. And then there is kind of misunderstanding of how many have died. To this, a lot of this confrontation I'm going to talk about, there's kind of there's not clear proof of how many people died, whatever government says, or protesters. So yeah, so those turn into political demonstrations themselves, and then they keep on passing on because some of those Shabbat Shaleh's political demonstrations turn into confrontations. More people are shot or taken away by Savak, the secret police. Some tortured, some are just held, some in prison. Anyways, but all those kind of overlap and go on forth, right? So if somebody else dies on the Shabbat Shaleh protest, then they have the 40th day, that turns to 40 more days of protest. So this idea of kind of did these deaths extend this social political unrests within Iran. Then in 19th of August, there is these are all 1978, at the Rex Cinema. This is in Abadan in south of Iran. Remember where the British refineries were. There is a fire at a cinema, and where 400 people died. To this day, nobody knows who set this fire. There is a very good book about it. It was written in Farsi and now it's translated in Persian. Regardless, but there is also rumors, I have to get blocked of the cinema as it was set on fire, so people think it was deliberate. Anyways, the protesters, of course, said the Shah used the people to do it, especially kind of fragments. Another one is This is Z and H is pronounced as J, so this is Jaleh Square. And squares in Iran are actually circle, right? They're all roundabouts. The squares as city construction. I'm talking about city landscape. Yeah. So Meydan Jaleh or Jaleh Square in 8th of September, where there are no, some say people knew and they came out anyways. And again, there's a confrontation when the army opens fire on the people. So, and you know, this Meydan Jaleh is a really huge enigma because some people say 70 people died, some people say that. Nevertheless, Meydan Jaleh is like now a very famous place in Iran because it's kind of a site of martyrdom again. There are also massive, at this time, near the end of 78, there are these, especially because of the leftist groups, there are these massive kind of unions that have gone on strike. And even people that are in like judiciary branch of the government or bureaucracies or bank tellers and people are the DMV version of Iran, even they go on strike. People who are not even some unionized. So there's this kind of mass strike in Iran where people are not going to work and trying to kind of do what's happening to US now to finish off the economy. But this also shows solidarity between all factions of the revolution. In November 5th, there's still, at this point, there are demonstrations and riots almost every day in Iran. But Michel Foucault was in Iran at this time. He wrote a bunch of articles on it. If you're interested, they're translated to English. It's interesting to just kind of look at these events. The Shah goes on and addresses the Iranian people, and this is kind of a surreal. This is on YouTube. I think I've seen it in Farsi. I think that it is with English subtitles. When Shah has kind of, he's basically saying, "I'm sorry, we're all this country ridden. There are people who died, you know, just very sincere, committing himself 100% to this." And, you know, there's this long list that he gives of things that he's going to go do immediately, which if he had done 3 months before, it would have sufficed. But now it's too late because people are just disregard his public appearance. The Shah even kind of sets up a new government with Shahpur Bakhtiyar, right? He creates a new government. Shahpur Bakhtiyar is that name, right? Should ring something to you, but by this time in the course, because he's from the Bakht, he's related to the Bakhtiyari tribe. He's kind of a French-educated intellectual, but kind of famous within the Iranian oppositions. And he's from the National Front Party, the Nationalist Party, the Mossadegh was a farm party. And so Shah is kind of extending his hand immediately. Here's your Shahpur Bakhtiyar. I'm removing censorship. We're not going to kill people in the streets anymore. But at this time, it's too late. Ibn Khomeini, who to France from Najaf, from his exile, calls this government illegitimate. And now this is the first of getting rid of the Shah. Having a total revolution was never the goal. The idea is, as we've talked about differently, we're about serious reforms, but now the people just are not having it. The Shah has to go. In January 16 of 1979, the Shah basically escapes Iran. He sets up a provisional government. Who the provisional government like goes to France and reaches to Khomeini, come back and, lead us. And Khomeini is basically tells them, if you don't all relinquish your positions, I'm not going to recognize your government, which means that I'm just not going to recognize your government. So on January 26th, now we've gone into 1979, of course, Khomeini returns to Iran. He forms a new government with Mehdi Bozargan. And on February 11, at this time, the revolution is done because there is no more opposition to what is to come. And at this point, which will be for Wednesday, this is when the revolution, as all revolutions say, is like, now who gets to, well, as in Iran was kind of the last vestige of oppositions, right? The people and their government, because the provisional government has already caved in to Khomeini era begins. Now, this process is going to kind of describing what actually the revolution does from February on is some story that I'm going to get into. Again, we're going to take it very slow. But here you've seen the end of Pahlavi, and this is the last dynasty within Iran. So from the beginning, we talked about with the Haqamaneshian, and this is the last one. From here on out, we'll no more have dynasties. So we'll start talking about presidents and kind of government. Put these up right now after this. Please put all your grades in. I want to give it, and if you're having a problem, please let me know. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday.